so
I can't deal with it. It's
You're from Minnesota.
not anymore. I haven't lived there in a long time.
That just feels like I don't know how I want to adjust.
12 years.
Where do you live now?
11 years. LA.
Oh yeah, you're in the struggle. Struggle.
I saw on the scam that you're now Christopher Randall. When did you make this switch?
Well, I was born. That's my name.
I know, but like on the scam.
I don't know who did that. I don't know who did that. I did not. I was not in on that, and I don't know if I paid enough attention to care, to be honest. But like everybody's asked me that, I was like, I didn't know. Don't care. I don't.
I thought you made like I'm a Christopher now.
No.
It's time to grow up.
I don't have time for that foolishness. If that's your grow up moment, you suck. Your adulting is trash. If you're like, who call me by my full name? That's how I can be an adult. Your adulting is trash. And you know, considering some days, you know, my adulting is not always great.
Let me know when you both, or when you all are good for the speech drop. Okay, lowercase w, uppercase x, 4, the rest are lowercase, A, P, O. Did that work? Alright, let me know when everyone's good.
Let's see. Let me do the speech drop down there.
Yep. There's code.
Okay. What is the room code? Is the room code?
Yeah. It's W, lowercase.
Okay.
Uppercase X. 4. And then APO lowercase.
All right, got it.
Theis, you good?
Yep, I'm all good. Everyone else is.
Mm-hmm.
Treaty rights such as housing have been chronically underfunded and unenforceable lease for treaty rights to the ethical obligation to vote after recognized indigenous self-government state. Or 19. The federal government fails to fulfill duties in many treaties. The government fails to guarantee housing to tribes that indigenous legally duties, the moral obligation versus the government's obligation, voluntary and unenforceable. The general such treaty does not have teeth. The Congress chooses not to act the duly labeled duties voluntary. The churches continue dramatically in a court fulfilling the treaty recognizing tribal nations of political entities. The government does need to fund obligation parties that will come from housing assistance providing 2013 obligation extent not just founding but also self-governing responsible towards honoring treaty obligations are meaningfully recognized of fully autonomous self-governing peoples of current federal indigenous housing program which dramatically failing Sterling 17. For the past 2 decades, housing condition for Indian households has been substantially worse than other U.S. household homes, like infrastructure, legal issues of physical condition, overcrowding, remain with forever labor, efficiency, plumbing, kitchen, heating, electrical maintenance, 7% of these little double percent because they know where else overcrowding, finding 34% of tribal household population, 7% of all U.S. households deep in entering housing needs by native and federal assistance housing funding has enrolled plan. The U.S. ought to guarantee the treaty right to housing failure, to guarantee housing violence, treaty rights mar. 20. Every tribal housing unit is overcrowded, currently landed for the federal government. Those kinds of living condition where you introduce a virus could be catastrophic. That 16% of native households are overcrowded at the same time the national average under Canada federal for curtailing initiative programs that controls the federal government should be responsible for housing on reservation law, providing constitutional violation of treaty rights. Housing dollars have been historically granted to non-materials and tribes. Amount tribes are expending because it is key in enable litigation. Round 20. The rules on cyber treaties have been broken through usually the ground for obligations to obligations requiring the federal government to prove adequate resources of powerful native governments to prove that American and Indian movements is sitting wrong and center on fulfilling treaty obligations. Worker groups of winners to treaty for
Clear.
These are treaty rights tribes have to litigate to make them real because federal Indian policies abandon commitment. The right to negate the role of the ballot is to center indigenous demands and resistance only by seeking the question of what should we do to the jurisdiction of native scholars can we provide an ethical course of action caution. 16. Indigenous people have been speaking for a long time. Resistance is rendered visible. Ethical theory acknowledges the limitation of settler scholars with a dialogue with indigenous people. Please ethical demands including that we actively refuse to re-empower our own academic voices to marginalize indigenous resistance. We can center indigenous resistance in our work. If our voice, if our work has no foundation on indigenous songs, if our studies are problematic before evaluating the utility of the plan, you should consider whether we even have a right to refuse a decolonial commitment. Must see treaties as reciprocal and unwavering. Last, forced confrontation with our own obligations settles assumption of sovereignty and places the basis for decolonial organizing. Hiller. 16. Treaty nerds and environment and treaty rights enacted by indigenous peoples continue to revoke and say by violent treaty relations and actions that reflect the civil letter colonial nation trying to do away with the Indian problem treaties figure in the settler imagination in a number of ways and underlying this continuity symbolic violence and pervasive disrespect for indigenous peoples. You have been to think about treaty rights and privilege that Indians have rather reciprocal arrangements, so it's arguing particular also frame this to a societal training where must the beginning of a deeper prolonged treaty practice treaty relationship renders visible colonizing assumption of bases to re-envision for present and future relations, ultimately sending the question as a launch pad that treaty something between nations means that I'm an inheritor of this agreement, have responsibility to treat colonization is progress of becoming believing in indigenous understanding of the treaties over and against engagement with a specific content. I don't need to learn everything to make up a legal instrument. Being a non-indigenous treaty person demands direct engagement in supporting indigenous people responsible for the recognition of a treaty relationship, representation, and epistemology, perpetuate settler practices, the way we understand and discuss structures over terms of practice, one season epistemological interrogation and reorientation that challenges hegemonic North theory. 14. Settler traditions in place are represented genealogy, ethics, and ideology framework that establishes how the world is to be interpreted. Settler traditions in place are admitted through teaching and normalize epistemic and institutions. Settler in traditions of high perpetuate hierarchies, old discourse, manifest cultural assumption, individual acts of the agency, break traditions, this work can inspire epistemic fiction. Those uncomfortable assumptions begin to carbon catalyze critical consciousness to actualize an alternative epistemology. Housing is a necessary starting point, not a conclusion. The approach to treaties moves beyond the totalism of state bad good towards a complex optimism, skepticism, representation of treaty rights doesn't create innocence, but rather opens our practice to understandings of indigenous treaty rights oriented towards decolonization. Native Tom Taylor. 16. Treaty implementation alone does not just the intentions of occupations. We see treaties that pertain to indigenous people, nothing to do with treaties to lay the groundwork for reimagining relations. Context non-indigenous ever requires specific knowledge of the treaty provision. On the other hand, seeking truth about the treaties to discredit indigenous assertion. We are all treaty people need to maintain a critical skepticism, yet treaty sufficient can be inadvertently diminished. Indigenous understanding is also a position of native or individuals who call for treaties to failing to recognize the significance of treaty amounts to an act of colonization, where the treaty represents a force in the everyday set of evolving relations. Treaties a process to be reaffirmed the needs of writing relationship with indigenous people. Extinction impacts are fabricated by the settler death settlers have psychological investment. Imagine the end of a world to create a sense of vulnerability of the because of enacting decolonization. You to presume their distance to be false. 16. Settlers to contemplate the possibility of their own extinction, even if the end seems unlikely to even have a future. Offer settlers constitute anxiety about the past settler colonial narrative, shaping around the nature race. The native settler colonial narrative can never contemplate an ending logic of invasion to market settlers. Responses to the inevitability of indigenous extinction. The tropic extinction makes it less so for settlers to narrate their presence about how others details the destruction narratives of settler extinction acts of ideological mystification, the obscuring inequality behind a mask of white vulnerability. Extinction narrative radical change creating moves and innocence versus the easy way when the negative attempts to reframe the data or prior questions. You should dwell on and embrace and discover that the outbreaks rather than finding bad excuses to avoid confrontation. Her with 17. I get with that settlers have been consistent pattern of assertion. Settlers expect to be comfortable and be certain people are virtually immersive and the people by giving feedback and maintain white solidarity that we offer to protect white people. A lot of people want to ignore you. Choose to feel a pain or can never recall them to choose to help or hide the when it allows whether or not to engage in necessary push colonization to the forefront of white settlers' consequences. I'm going to read more cards. I'll send them up there. Treaty rights are GWIFC. Rights are retained in treaties between sovereigns. Legal unrestricted rights held by the tribes, tribal, not individual. They are held by the signatory tribes. The CRTC says the misconception that Indians have special rights because the certain rights belong to tribes because they were sovereign nations who signed treaties. The Supreme Court has recognized treaties as legitimate basis for rights. Generic rights must be universal. Evidence is intended to the nuances of treaty-based rights. IHCPL 21. The United States was defined through treaty making Indian tribes retaining all maritime especially again. The Supreme Court has affirmed this principle. The Supreme Court explained that treaties are to be interpreted in favor of tribes and ambiguous provisions interpreted for their benefit. Treaties are the source of legal the treaties are the source of legal authority for treaty rights. Yeah, that's fine. I'll send it the cards.
Cool.
The doc's uploaded. I'm good for cards.
Okay. Who is guaranteed a right to housing under the treaty right?
The tribes that the federal government signed the treaty with.
So only indigenous tribes are given the right to housing.
Those are the tribes that the government signed the treaty with, yes.
Okay, cool. So like everyone else does not get a right to housing?
Well, they're honoring a treaty right to housing, so everyone that signed onto the treaty gets the right to housing.
Who can sign on to the treaty?
The indigenous tribes that the federal government signed onto hundreds of years ago, but didn't abide by.
Okay, SCOTUS is key to enable litigation.
Yeah.
Who does the plan? The USFG does it, but
yeah, we say that the way that a right is guaranteed is basically the Supreme Court rules that there is a treaty right to guarantee to housing.
So the Supreme Court does the plan.
Yes, we say that that's key.
What evidence is that the Supreme Court doing the plan is key?
That's the Brown 20 evidence. It basically says that the line I'll read verbatim says that treaties lay the groundwork for obligations requiring the federal government to provide adequate resources. The warrant behind this is that once the SCOTUS guarantees the legal right to something, that means that citizens now have the power to engage in litigatory processes with the government if the government does not abide by fulfilling that right. Right now, because the government does not actually recognize the right to housing in the treaty, that means that Native communities cannot sue the government or go to the government to say say that they are not fulfilling their end of the treaty.
The Hiller evidence talks about
Which one?
the first one on the framing section. The Hiller evidence talks about a commitment to decolonization. What does the plan do about that?
Sure, I get the plan is a starting point to decolonization. We say that when the federal government gives natives certain rights back, that starts a ground that starts like a movement towards decolonization. Our evidence says that small steps are necessary to cross the
If tribes don't want to sign on to the treaty, are they forced to have the right to housing? Like tribes that don't sign the treaty, did they get rights? Do they get a right to housing, or only the tribe? Or
the
only
tribes
the
that sign the treaty get the right to housing. That's how treaties work.
Okay, sure. Back to like the SCOTUS part. This brown card is talking about like treaties being ratified being important. Where does it say that like the Supreme Court has to do that? Like, why can't states do that? Why can't other branches?
Okay, but read the card. It says the Supreme Court decision.
Can you give me a line on it?
It says right at the top of the card, it says the Supreme Court decision. Also, like, this is basically how, like, this is how rights work. Like, the way that rights work is that the Supreme Court guarantees the right. Next to that, we would say that because the federal government signed this treaty hundreds of years ago, it cannot be implemented by the states. It has to be implemented by the government.
Why did you not disclose this app to me?
Because I didn't want to.
Why?
Because I wanted to see you pressed. I don't know.
You want to see me pressed?
Yeah, we say that it's good for settlers to be uncomfortable. I wanted to see you uncomfortable.
Wait, does that not apply to you as well? Like,
I mean, that's why I'm reading this out.
it makes you pressed?
No, I said that I wanted to see you uncomfortable because it's good to engage in those discussions of uncomfortability, specifically surrounding Indigenous rights.
Okay, 5. So I'll grab 406 for me. It's gonna be 7 off, then case top down. Actually, sorry, case in the framing, then the advantage order.
7 off, you said?
Yeah. It's 7.
How many off you say?
7.
Maybe make some tabs.
Is everyone good?
I'm good.
Randall, you good?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Counterclaim: the United States ought to enter into a prior binding genuine consultation with the tribes over whether the United States ought to establish a treaty of right to housing. They say yes if they don't. It's a TA to the plan. Canal 20. Tribal governments can no longer tolerate substantial housing substance to the worth of making funding offers away with noble nations such as standard for Hungarian housing. Nationwide housing is powerful to reflect Indigenous values. We need to create long-term solutions. Free, prior, binding, and informative consent is key. Providing tribes with veto power and changes. Consultation adequate, integral tribal input facilitates cooperation and avoids exploitation. Independently consent to the plan. Failure to consult violates Indigenous conception of mutual respect and autonomy. 120. Consultation key part of civil government system. Informed consent and not be pressured deliberate with given feedback at time and access. Continue use federacy information. Cost of benefits and research. Tribal evidence would have two-way veto right. Tribal consent rarely student meeting the strong there was attention recommendation no accountability tradition deal great on consent to vagueness of the law. The consultation represents breaking down respect honor with respect. It competes guarantees a certain consent. If a guarantee another certain issue, and the second thing is guaranteed to make a certain issue, it will happen. Next up, renewables limit fossil fuel emissions now. 20. The energy-related emissions under 1% solar EVs heat pump efficiency, limited impacts of oil crisis, and of fuel accelerated clean energy transition pathways, meeting climate goals, emissions lower than growth of 550 million tons of clean energy technologies, housing, zero rates destroys the environment, turns the case large global 20. Climate crisis threatens the right to housing, washing away, flattening hurricanes, diversification, raising sea levels, displacing billions of housing, major contributor housing has not been endlessly destroyed our planet, means of weakening destruction, inhabitability, homes that are insulated, heat waves, produce wildfires, implication of affordability, energy, poverty, sea level rise, ocean acidification, global retreat, biodiversity, uninhabitable, peoples migrate to rural areas, disease overburn, forcing informal settlements, all station institution use and management, demolition, consumer, presume produce emissions, IPCC estimated use of construction accounts for 37% of carbon, dismantle large footprints, increase the living space, additional land emission, pollutants, methane, nitrogen oxide, deforestation, soil transportation, demand, climate change, causes extinction, and turns every impact penalty to NOV 23. Future impact overwhelming adaptive capacity tipping points to generate high GHG concentration of fire in the Amazon, Antarctic, permafrost releases CO2 irreversible changes may be triggering other intermediate stressors such as loss of biodiversity, pollution, exacerbate economic damage, cascading effects, generate conflict, political instability, financial risk, disease, spillover, antibiotic, climate change could cause war, catastrophic societal collapse. Next off, counterplan the 50 states and all relevant territories of the United States ought to guarantee a right to treaty housing. The assaults better and cause federal fall in China and McDonald 22. Courts have recognized the right to housing appearance citizenship of federal courts declining federal rates housing Supreme Court foreclosed constitutional right to housing jurisdiction. We recognize the right to housing, yet a large discrepancy exists between New York provided foundation of states right to housing in the United States commitment for universal access adequate housing failure. Federal government has left the states to own devices, piecemeal approaches indicates the United States has compelled legally grounded coordination national approach to the state adopted rights based housing helping increases accountability in the United States could realign with international standards through to the state level. Several advantages of the state closing gaps out broader political, easier to amend critical driver, more effective institutional frameworks, constitutional right, establish legal obligation, mandates, resources to improve access. I'm not reading the competition card. They were clear in process that they do. The plan through the Supreme Court. Anything else is the shifts out of their entire advocacy. Next off, the Farm Bill will pass now far enough on climate. PC is key. Gobble to enough voters together. April 22. Future American food up for grab. Lawmakers hug on the bill to Congress. The biggest hurdle is the same bill. Then moving through divided Congress. Voters cobbling votes of both sides, which means going far enough on the issue and incentivize them, which scares some Republicans by themselves. Are the jostling trying to pass forward these numbers? Part of practice of focusing on packaging that pass on the eye on the price. Continue housing policy. Cost Biden's BC. The core will look at him doing a Cohen's 20. Biden will need to invest more political capital, pushing up funding of both subsidized market rate housing, multi-family construction, like Biden's administration ready to low-income construction and housing, conservative think tanks, COVID, Ukraine, and warming exposed fragility in food insecurity. Only Farm Bill solves the little 22. The Farm Bill confronted shifts of food as the farm bill produces the food consolidation, climate resilience, when produces a hit wild-storm, but must continue generating food. A disaster is happening, hurricanes, windstorms, Ukraine, revealing vulnerability in crops, cut the cart at crops, food insecurity goes new good crops. 22. Humans have brought over the world for 20,000 years, food scarcity, primacy of the modern conflicts regions. There are high risk of food failure, conflict failure ranging from nuclear war. Next up, for interpretation rights must be universal co-energy. Acceptance rights means everyone is entitled to the claim rights are inherent. All humans being in birthright to have mother values. No ways and inviolable rights have been extended to understanding of every human being on the planet making the claim. So everyone else can violation. They only give the right to housing to people in the treaty voter for limits and restrictions of rights. As subgroups opens the floodgate for thousands of groups people area specific with different mechanisms weakening, strengthening coercion generics. Next up, Indian apps are new undisclosed apps are a voting issue for predictability. Prevents a debit clash because they don't have time to prepare for it. Next up, we advocate for the one to see absent the call for the seat to debate jurisdiction of native scholars surrendering to indigeneity as a form of deterrence. Politics is the worst for community formation. Reify Solar Planet and Tower 20. When people say listen to affected, it is not most controversial. The authority calling for deterrence, counter marginalizing these spaces to access room, social advantages, deterrence campaigns, direct attention away from the system, prevent centering marginalized focus to occupying rather than interactions. We don't failure to censure the right to topic having corresponding effects, especially when community normalizes the behavior, provide abdication, responsibility, and hypersanitized coercion. The difference may be smoother psychological wildness, being interment, fight for freedom rather than privilege, focus on specific rather than avoiding complexity, moral principles, of symbolism. A competes the opportunity cost of reading. The app of scholarship is that you must be held to every part of the app. That means that if you conclude that they are largely correct, you should vote negative to intellectually sharpen the app and submit a research review that makes the politics more effective. Any permanent severance, which is a voting issue that makes it impossible, undermines logical basis for the offense. The case page extinction outweighs the symptomatic large risk and inflicts suffering on 7 billion people, be it irreversible prereq to addressing all other issues. Con 18. Hurrying up for immutable, we would rise as challenges only outcome irreversible extinction concerns to dismiss have been nuclear threat, easy extinction Constitution. Rule 99.9% have ever gone displaying at the wartime, cut the card at wartime. They're Carlson evidence. 1, vote for the better debate, or anything else is arbitrary and self-serving, causes race subject truisms which are impossible to negate. 2nd, settlers don't have the jurisdiction to tell you how to evaluate the round justifies using native minorities for ballots that Hiller evidence. 1, the plan doesn't decolonize, it can't solve their impacts or commit to a treaty, anything else. It continues to use the state even more, which is worse, that makes decolonization impossible, and they haven't explained or given a warrant for it by any of their cards that the right to treaty would make decolonization possible. Their sea right evidence doesn't apply to debate competing, determines over political potential discussions of an argument we advocate, doesn't shape subjectivity. 2nd, consequences are reps are intrinsically connected. If the plan causes extinction, Indigenous tribes to affirm is violent and bad for discourse on daily, assumes a fabricated extinction, statement by analyzing settler literature, which doesn't apply to us, and not reading that next card. 3, presumption or presumptive. Vote neg on presumption is a double bind. 8, either they're not a change from the status quo, or they're for a change not inherent, or they are a departure from the status quo, but the act is too small to solve any of their impacts, which means that they can't solve anything. The turns decolonization into a metaphor, makes the 1AC a move to innocence. 2nd, Yang 12. Decolonization breaks reparation of indigenous life, not a metaphor entangled in settler colonialism, making it impossible to innocence that was used. Settler futurity courts see a right-based approach to shift the burden to marginalized groups that have the least power or ability to deploy and shift legal resource rather than service the profession of its was. 22. A practical limitation of legal rights approaches cause difficulties, waste burdens on responsibility, ensuring rights in the wrong place, distribute power of people's rights, and will alone get complaining and making their condition upon their demand right-based encourages an adversarial problem rather than a different approach to right. Resources of legal profession away from service is magnified. In the context of the act, the plan would force Native people to go to settler courts to issue for rights with a form of recognition-based politics, which reaffirms the state sovereignty. The plan does not think South Africa approves of 18. South Africa Constitution to protect the right to housing of the law effective would be passed in 2001. Got the card in 2001.
Okay, status of the offs.
Conditional.
Okay, can you explain the 7th off?
The 7th op advocates for the entirety of the 1AC, except for the line that you said cedes the debate to the jurisdiction of Native scholars. Ceding, surrendering to Native scholars is bad, and
Why?
surrendering to what?
Why?
Because it reaffirms settler colonialism, because white backlash and political institutions that obviously are extremely don't believe in it, are racist, wouldn't support surrendering to Indigenous, and would cause massive political backlash, which worsens the community overall.
So it's
Indigenous
bad
life.
because it unsettles settlers?
Settlers would backlash, which would make it even worse. It causes
How does it make it worse?
settler backlash, ceding resistance to Indigenous scholarship makes it so that settlers view it as a policy.
So what should we be using as our scholarship? Should we be using settlers to say what natives want?
No, it's not that saying that using Native scholarship is bad, but surrendering to Native scholarship is different than saying using Native scholarship.
Okay. The 2nd off, can you explain how guaranteeing housing or fixing conditions that natives are living in now destroys the environment?
The plan would inevitably increase the amount of housing, build houses.
Where does it say
repair
that we do
houses.
that?
You sign a treaty that gives people the right to housing. The right.
Okay, why does that mean that we build more houses?
The link evidence, the Rajagopal evidence says that it would the right to housing would require building houses and also recommodification of current housing. That is
building 1,000 houses enough to trigger the link?
It's like a linear descent. So
okay, so what about all the businesses that are building more what about the sky rises in New York? Why does that
yeah, those are pretty bad for climate change. Have you seen the weather report in New York? The sky is
yeah, exactly. Thank you for proving my point.
Mean,
why is that not non-unique your own?
We read uniqueness about renewable transition.
You have not read uniqueness.
We've read uniqueness about renewable transition. The plan would use fossil fuels that are dirty.
The politics decide. Why does it look like Biden is doing it when the court is 6 conservatives?
The argument is that any a major housing policy
okay,
plan.
Wait. Where's the AFA policy? We guarantee it right.
Are you saying that the United States does not do anything the Supreme Court would be enacting a right, which is the same as a huge housing policy? It would cause massive backlash in Congress.
Wait, how does it cause backlash in Congress? I'm not.
The Cohen evidence says that housing policies cost Biden's PC. The Supreme Court doing the plan, i.e., passing the right to treaty, would be viewed as Biden costing his political capital, which would affect him in Congress.
Okay, that's fine. The 2 point on Hiller, you said that there are other methods other than treaty focus. What are those other methods?
I didn't read that argument.
Okay, that's fine. C right, why doesn't our argument apply to debate?
Because the competitive aspect of debate, but ballots, meaning wins and losses, prep time, etc., have made it so that debate doesn't shape subjectivity within if I lose this round, I'm not gonna if I lose this round or debating settler colonialism doesn't change my viewpoint on the overall world.
Okay. It's 5 minutes of prep, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll start time now. 3:20 left. I'm gonna write that down. And then when Randall comes back, I'll send out the Well, the order's just gonna be case, top down, then the offs in order.
I forgot the order of the offs.
I will try to name the offs as I go. But the responses will make sense. Okay, the 1AR is in. Let me know if you don't see it. Sometimes the doc doesn't really
Can I
see
get the order?
Yeah, it'll be the app, like top down, then the offs in order. And then the 1AR, like all the stuff is way at the bottom of the box. You both good? Or all of you good?
Yeah.
Randall, you good?
Mm-hmm.
Enough?
Yeah.
The right to housing is key to upholding treaty obligations. That unsettles paternalistic settler notions of treaties and creates space for Indigenous understandings of treaty rights oriented towards decolonization and native sovereignty. The 1NC Fitzpatrick, this card is absolutely stupid. The 1NC gives litigatory power to natives, which allows them to reclaim the rights. We also fiat effectiveness, which means the blame is not placed on the marginalized communities, but rather the power is given back to them. The role of the ballot will extend here. We, as settlers, do not have the right to negate in the plan because that results in paternalistic views of treaty rights based upon settler interests that justifies ongoing occupation or violation of treaties. Second is that the 1NC turns and it has a because our rep shape the way that we view and interact with the world, which means that you should reject any dissent because it creates a paternalistic notion of picking and choosing which treaty rights to honor, which undermines native sovereignty. We also don't tell you what to do with Indigenous demands that we are sort of forefronting as settlers. The plan does decolonize because it is a starting point towards decolonization in the end, which starts by giving Native people back certain rights. The sea right evidence, yes, rep shape reality that with sea rights, settler traditions are perpetuated in the way we frame and view things because our discourse translates into cultural assumptions which shape the way that we view and interact with the world. This is specific to the way that we debate. Yes, we unsettle the space because discussions are not currently centered around indigeneity. The extinction cards, extinction thoughts are constructed by settlers to justify settler society and moves for innocence under a mask of vulnerability at the expense of enacting decolonization, which means even if extinction matters in a vacuum, we should reject their scenario for being pedagogically harmful. The presumption double bind. We are changing the status quo because we guarantee a right to housing, but it's not too small because it's a launching point for bigger movements in the app. Often this is a starting point it's just a starting point. We're not conscientization. The consult counterplan. One is permitted the counterplan. A is resolved option. Consult delivery. Is no ask for advice consultation. Number basis number general Martin 19. Tribal consultation really happens in England before the federal agency times consulting tribal nations have repeatedly failed to contact tribes with the appropriate time. And all second is that the counterpart will require consulting over 565 native nations. They have no mechanism to resolve disputes in really competing interests. Either they can't solve the net benefit or the act and the recreates homogenization. Their assumption is that all natives will think the same double towards their own net benefit, and the federal government has already technically consulted with these tribes because they signed the treaty that build more houses. Just that one is no, there's no evidence that U.S. houses are enough to cause climate change on their own. Second, the process was extremely embarrassing for them because they can't quantify as to how building houses for native people is going to trigger the link. But we fix things like sanitary conditions, etc., which doesn't guarantee the link. Next is no link. The right to housing doesn't mandate more building houses. Table Initiative 13. The right to housing does not apply to government to be able to home for their responsibility, includes preventing homelessness, preventing forced eviction, eliminating discrimination, guaranteeing the status of housing, and no extinction adaptation proves that IPC models are outdated now, which means that climate change isn't going to cause extinction. The third off. One is permanently accountable. The U.S. can be the state's own, or the United States may be used as maybe the name of a sovereign, or maybe the collective of the state. Second is the solvency deficit. The Supreme Court is necessary to guarantee legal rights because they signed the treaty with the natives in the first place. That was the HHB evidence that we read on case. We'll cross-apply that here. Next, the solvency deficit doesn't effectively guarantee a right because states lack the same funding as the federal government. Next, another solvency deficit. Centralization is good because it decks power as a whole, but the states doing it doesn't weaken the federal government, which means that natives still don't have a new launching point for decolonization. The fourth off, because court action gives politicians to steal Whittington by ways of political support, judicial review, and apparent judicial action, official action, of concerns, for be decision, judicial error for resolution. Judges are willing to accommodate presidents, actively seek to overturn controversial questions to the court to avoid the political follow that will come to taking direction actions themselves, cut the credit themselves. No new true or linking extrapolation. The one is missing a link. Any new argument of the courts is definitionally new since it skews one air strategy, and Biden would not be associated with the courts. The court is literally 6 conservatives and 3 Democrats. Obviously, Biden is not going to be blamed for it. The T-shell. We give a right to housing to all members of indigenous treaties. Nations who signed a treaty will extend the cross-apply the role of the ballot here. Next, cross-apply the HCP evidence that all the evidence that we read at the bottom of the case. No limits on its functional limits and generic text. Stable action proves that we bracket out assets select based on group or location, and we ensure link magnitude to election, housing prices, stereotypes, sizes, etc. Next is 1A extend 1AC her with fairness, build and settler comfortability. One, a comfortable settler is going to procedural fairness instead of grappling with important issues, which means that they shift them to debate themselves in the U.S. But this was one in the 1AC hold the line on the 2 and our U.S. is good forces of quick thinking as opposed to crap which is the most portable inward skill office disclosure shield the strategic benefit to doing the research and decrease sales race and topic innovation crossplay the world about decay. The counterplan current do both. Second is no link seating to natives is good because it causes critical consciousness. That was C right, and settler backslashing is good because they can't do anything post the plan to circumvent it. All they can do is to sort of say that they are uncomfortable with ceding to indigenous demands, but we say that is good because it ruptures settler comfortability, which catalyzes critical consciousness, which changes the way that we view our position as settlers in and outside of the round.
406. No reasons to reject the team, right?
Yeah.
The phrasing issue that this is a debate about today actually has not realized what mistakes it is, or they have a central misunderstanding of what debates they do, which influences how you should think about offense in this round. The reason that they say they should win or reason they should lose, they have not justified their arguments related to the ballot. You're talking about black policy to be good for black people are good in a vacuum. They've not justified why affirmative is good inside of the debate. They've only given you generic responses, but our analysis is not abstract. They've read a radical literature and so on. It is not drawn the line between going
surrender, topicality, the warming DA, the states counterplan, the consult counterplan, case.
So the surrender counterplan,
Yeah.
then T,
Yeah.
then the build more houses decide.
Yeah,
The climate
the warming DA, yeah.
Then the states counterplan, then the consult counterplan, then case.
Yeah, for sure.
You got a lot going on, though.
Yeah.
Like a lot.
Is there anywhere you're starting on case?
I'll start on the roll about.
Okay. I'm good.
I'm getting old, bro. It's setting in. It's setting in. It's setting in. Like 7 years ago, we've been on it. Yeah, we're good. Got it. It's like now it's like, man.
Is everyone good?
Yeah.
Okay.
I need you to sign. I'm not even front with you. I need you to sign.
Yeah, for sure.
Or my life is gonna change in a negative way, and that wouldn't be good.
I will signpost.
Crazy.
Vote negative to endorse the method of the app without the call to surrender to indigeneity. We have impact turn the abstract of racial difference. One, it's a symbolic move to exonerate guilt in an audience and create a short-term emotional feeling of gratification that trades off with a more substantial conversation about tactics and theories from resisting indigenous settlerism by shifting the terms of the debate towards academic recognition and not material adjustments from racial inequality, which trades off with the ability of debate to substantially engage with the political world. Second is spatiality, demanding debate by being marginally more ethical, focused on the room we occupy, not the interactions we don't experience. Even through debate, even if the debate is racist at times, it's still overwhelmingly privileged and progressive communities, shifting the focus of the activity towards minor refinements of elite academia instead of confronting the problems of the most marginalized, consolidates the academia and self-satisfies isolation and from modern inequality. The first argument is permutation do both. There's no chance it's ever the counterplan does not have the counterplan does not surrender to indigeneity, which the plan does, which means that the compatibility of both of them is impossible because we specifically picked out of a part of the app, which means that it's impossible to do both of them at the same time, which means that they should be housed in representations. The app has multiple cards about way reps shape reality, and the way that we use our rhetoric is important, which means that they cannot sever their representation under their interpretation. They say no link. The entirety of the 1AR was surrendering to indigeneity being a good thing, and the indigeneity being offense for them, which means that there's no chance they can go for no link. It's like a bunch of settler backlash being good, and the no link argument just doesn't make sense in the context that they've said the specific words. They've said rhetoric matters, which means that there's no chance that they can go for anything else. The only chance is like the roll of the ballot is good. The settler backlash DA, you should frame it. You should frame it through three arguments. One is that single debates don't matter. It's a round robin debate. The difference between making finals is a non-issue, and the deficit of assertion that proves our argument that is unconditional difference between circular justification for privileged institutions like debate that come at the expense of material organizing. Second, if we impact turn to the contestation of the 1AC, the inspiration is bad. The more people saying we should surrender to indigeneity proves that our impacts are unique, and it's more of a reason to vote negative, not the other way around. Three is that debate should be about more than just itself. That's our argument. You should have a higher bar for the ass being politically positive than just aspiring more people to do debate, because the whole point is that we should be tactically redeployed from the privilege of academic spaces like debate to help more people, not just create better debates. They say settler backlash is good, but that isn't our argument. Our argument is about the way that surrendering to indigenous seems like a good idea, especially from a settler guilt point, but it actually does nothing, and it doesn't and doesn't actually have any material action, which fails to do anything, which makes it impossible. They're going to classify the roll of the ballot. One, it was not done in the 1AR. You should hold the line because the 2AR extraction on how the roll of the ballot and the pick interact is going to be new. But second is that if we essentially impact from the roll of the ballot, because the way that they use indigenous scholarship and surrendering to it is problematic. We haven't said that native scholarship is bad or that using native scholarship is bad, but there's a difference between surrendering to native scholarship and using it. The pick was 20 seconds of the 1AR. Like, you cannot vote on it. We're significantly ahead on all the offense. Topicality. Our interpretation is that the right to housing must be universally guaranteed for everyone. The plan violates this by only guaranteeing a right to housing to indigenous tribes who signed the treaty, which is how they explained it in Crossix and the 1AR. Vote negative for limits. Their interpretation explodes beyond the bound of the topic. It can specify certain groups who get housing. They can specify natives, Hispanic people, black people, or any subgroup of people. They can defend populations by the city or state, like guaranteeing housing in Detroit or in California, which makes the topic unlimited because there are thousands of multiplicities that could grant a right to housing. Limits outweighs. They're the only impact that should be considered because it determines the ability of the negative response. Clash turns their offense its only benefit because it's necessary to access the benefits of the activity. Both sides link to an academic values of the 1AC. It's also the most portable benefit of the activity, so it should frame your values. So on the counter interpretation, only our interpretation is more precise. A right implicates everyone is entitled, i.e. the right to life, safety, shelter, etc. The rights are universal. They can be indexed to certain populations or groups. Their definition says absolutely nothing, and they didn't read it, which means that we're the only one with a predictable definition of what right to housing means, which means that you should err heavily negative. You should err heavily negative, even if you feel like their model of debate is more predictable. The stable actor argument, their interpretation doesn't ensure a link of ground. It's proven in the round in CX where they say that the plan only builds a few hundred housing. Native people are marginalized groups, which is why they're symptomatically marginalized, which means that we don't get the econ DA, warming DA, or any DA based on the government guaranteed the right to housing or a large swath of people. That eviscerates the big generics on the topic. The frame of the debate is to the fact that the 1AR just did not have a standard. They made a few defensive arguments about functional limits and stable actors, which isn't offense and a reason why you should prefer their interpretation. Fairness bad is not an argument. They've dropped the competitive incentives overdetermined the ability of the research and actually unsettling anyone. They didn't disclose the app because they wanted to win in by speech time, prep time, and are even fair in other norms that exist in debate, which proves that this is a non-starter. I'm splitting the two in R because they spent like 20 seconds on each of these flows. You can vote on either one of them. Topicality is a prior question. Fairness bad does not impact turn, and if they win an impact turn to T, it doesn't answer the pig because we still agree with that central premise there. You can judge kick the pig if you feel like we're losing it because they consider conditionality. Conditionality is a functional add-on. I'm going to kick out a bunch of positions now. The link, the DA, we're not going for it. Concede no link. That exacerbates the violation on topicality. Concede permutation to the counterplan on Theis. Concede permutation to the counterplan on consult. We're not going for that. Concede no link on farm bill case. Framing issue on how you should evaluate the case debate is that if we win the pick, it zeroes the entirety of the app because we solved for 99.9% of the app. We just picked out of a specific representation and the way that they framed the value, which means that it solves all their offense. The second thing is that their app, the entire premise is about giving a treaty to housing, being able to solve for decolonization. But what 1AC card says that it does, to write to treaty or framing treaties would be able to spill over to decolonization broadly is not in the 1AC, is not a 1AR, a warrant extended on why decolonization is possible after accessing a treaty. It just doesn't make logical sense because the way that the treaty is given is by interacting with the historically racist Supreme Court that literally just override affirmative action and agree with them that a native treaty should follow these certain policies. That's like completely brain dead. It uses racist actors to spill to decolonization. It would increase state protest and minimum power. Okay, yeah.
Oh, wait.
Do I have a minute left? I think maybe I set my timer to 7.
I think you set your timer to 7.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I think it's been 15 minutes. I think it's been 15 minutes since I came back.
What do you mean?
When I left the room and came back.
15 minutes?
Yes. Just wondering if I would take my food.
I don't know.
Theis, you really are not helping me.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
We are in the struggle here. How's the family? How's the wife?
Everyone's good.
How's the married life treating you?
Pretty good. Yeah. No
You give me
complaints.
hope?
Blissful. What?
You give me hope? Give me hope. I'm trying to
I hope so.
make it happen.
How about you? How's everybody?
Everything is good. COVID did not do as much damage as it could have. Coconut shrimp.
Where?
The
Oh, from the
Yeah,
there.
very
Oh,
good.
gotcha,
I had it last night.
You good?
Does anyone know how to like unhide the apps at the bottom? I accidentally
hit them?
clicked Command Shift something, but I don't know what I clicked.
Oh, I don't know actually.
Because I can't like see.
Yeah.
Can I
Sure.
just Google it really quick?
Yeah, of course. But I should know that.
Sorry, it's making me do a robot test before I. Oh no, it's not working. You know what? I will.
Just if you
I'll just-
spotlight search doc. Spotlight search doc, and the options come up.
Yeah. And then. Okay, I like whatever. It's fine. I don't think I remember, but. Okay. It'll be the aft, the counter plan, and then T.
I'm good.
Randall, you good? Guys. The right to housing is key to upholding treaty obligations that unsettles paternalistic settler notions of treaties and center space for indigenous understandings of treaty rights oriented towards decolonization and native sovereignty. The role of the ballot, we as settlers do not have the right to negate the plan because that results in paternalistic views of treaty rights based upon settler interests that justifies ongoing settler occupation or violation of treaties. It's a question of whether you have a right to negate in the first place, not whether you should negate in the first place. Also, they're not going to win the pick. The spillover argument, yes, the ask spills over because it gives natives more power in the future because it allows them to determine the treaty right. That's fundamentally how it works. It takes power away from the government by giving natives shitty housing. That was why C. Heller. We read the evidence is absolutely excellent as to how small steps towards treaty rights actually materialize towards decolonization in the future. The counterplan. Top levels, ask yourself how the counterplan makes any sense. How does it make sense to not see the debate to indigenous demands and also resist settlerism at the same time? All of the explanation that they did at the top of the counterplan page is an argument. The 200 was literally just posturing. Taiwo makes none of the arguments that they made in the overview. Read the evidence, but we will impact turn the counterplan because ceding to indigenous demands is good. That ruptures settler comfortability and cause them to reevaluate their orientation towards indigenous demands in and outside of the round and in settler colonial spaces. The argument that Taiwo is making that maybe settlers will backlash in the future, but one is that fiat resolves the links, but next is that single debates do matter. That was C-Right. C-Right says that even one conversation can inspire people to catalyze critical consciousness. There was no impact in the Taiwo card. It says that specificity is good, but the only way to be specific is to affirm and allow for indigenous demands to be forefronted. Also doesn't solve because cross-apply the decolonization warrants in case if they don't see to indigenous demands in the first place, that isn't actually going to do anything to guarantee decolonization in the future or a future of non-violence towards indigenous communities. Also not settler guilt because we're making the discussion uncomfortable by centering indigenous demands. There's no differential between surrendering to indigenous demands and using indigenous demands. They're the same thing. The two-way extrapolation is not new because it's the same on every flow of the T page. Panav, please read the evidence that I put in the app. I cross-played all the cards that I read in the app. At the bottom is a counter-interpretation in the one area that they didn't actually respond to. Where our evidence is absolutely fantastic because the AHCP card specifically says that the Supreme Court has the authority to guarantee the right to housing as a treaty right, which the affirmative definitely does. It specifically says that certain rights belong to certain people who have signed a treaty. This pairs that was the GLIFWC evidence. This pairs with the AHCLP evidence because it says that the Supreme Court can guarantee a right to treaty. This was only signed with indigenous people. Prefer our interpretation on legal precision because it's specific to the court's guaranteeing a rights, and our interpret is more precise because it has an intent to define and include, but their interpretation does not have a right to exclude. What our interpretation definition is also the definition that they posit as of rights determined based on their location as settlers, but we need to take that away by forfeiting discussions of indigeneity, the grounds and limits to be able to do that here. All of the dissents that they write in the 2NR can be applied, even if they may lose the build more houses dissent, they still have, they can still read dissents predicated on the actor standard sizes, etc., but will extend Hurwitz as a discomfort dissent, which is the crux of the argument. They'll always shift the discussion away to what was comfortable for them, which is often under our role of the ballot, because it proves that given the opportunity to not engage in the act, they won't, because they'll just shift the discussion to what settlers want to do instead of what Indigenous people actually want to do.
Good debate.
Good debate.
obviously can't go too deep on many things without giving some stuff away, but a few things I think I can point out for each of you. Overall, I'm a fan in general of the AC. I do think maybe this comes out in other debates, but I think a big problem for me on this topic with the apps that I've seen is a little bit of a lack of specificity. You're specific in some ways, right? You're talking about treaty rights, but what does that actually mean the government has to do? You say housing conditions are shitty, they're insufficient. What is actually materially done to fix them? A lot of apps, and I think as of this debate, this app falls in that category, kind of just say housing, something about housing is bad. Like, we fix it, but like what and how? I think that's what debates will come down to as the topic progresses. And I think that might give you some more tools to deal with some of the stuff in this debate. For the most part, I think you efficiently deal with a lot of the arguments, a lot of the ops that are less plausible and don't overinvest where you don't need to, so I think that was really good. That said, I think the more responsive arguments were obviously put at the bottom, right, by the neg, and you run out of time on those arguments. So like the state's counter plan, the farm bill thing that doesn't really have a link, the climate thing that really doesn't have a link, all of those arguments.
That farm bill thing is trash.
Yeah.
I'm talking about boo hates. I don't know why. Who even thinks this is a good
That was
idea?
Launch's idea.
No, like,
It's just trash.
yeah, and like that card that's just like Biden wants to do housing, so they'll none of it really made a lot of sense. And I
Biden
think
wants to do housing, so that's going to do some other bad things. And then if we do that, then it's going to increase Ukraine, and some foolishness is going to jump off,
Yeah.
and tomfoolery is going to happen, and that's going to lead to some canery that's going to then cause nuclear war. No, hell no. That's way that internal link chain is way long.
Yeah, so I think like the disads especially and
Buns.
state's counterplan to a lesser degree, like were just not really plausible arguments, and you could move through them a little more quickly. The plausible arguments seemed to me were the counterplan that they do go for, topicality argument.
Yep.
New apps probably wasn't going to be
Cakes.
a great strategy,
Terrible.
especially because they sent one sentence on it. And consult maybe, depending on what the NR looks like on that, because it's like substantively at least engages kind of thematically with the app. So I would put more focus there instead of sort of an even focus. Just having some idea of sort of baseline plausibility of these arguments as responses and what you can spend a little less time on. And I think the negative ordering here was probably pretty deliberate.
Oh, for sure.
Then on the issues that become actually relevant, the counterplan and a few suggestions. I think on the counterplan, this isn't to say what my decision is, because I think there are a couple of answers here that are responsive, but a few of your answers do seem to be a misunderstanding of what the argument is. So I think there's, you make it a focus on backlash. I read the evidence, I don't really see a backlash argument there. It's more of like a shifting focus sort of argument to the wrong thing. We focus on like interpersonal, like social dynamics as opposed to material change, and you have arguments on that component of it. You mostly focus on this backlash argument that I just like don't see in the evidence, and I don't really hear the negative making either. So like maybe just getting a little bit clearer on what the argument is in cross-ex. And then on topicality, there's obviously like a weird thing where your definitions are at the bottom of the AC, and then they miss that, and like you clarify that in the 2AR, but being a little bit crisper on that in the 1AR, and I think having doing a little bit more weighing between the evidence that is provided on the interpretation level. You said mine is more specific, and I agree it is more specific, but you can probably go a little bit deeper than that, right? Like their cards are just talking about rights in general, for example, not the right to housing in any way, shape, or form. And there's some other tools I think you have given the evidence. You're not going to like really make standards arguments. You have to like really be really clearly winning the interp debate. So I would invest a little bit more there as well. Neg, I think the strategy is obviously a little scattershot, and like I don't necessarily blame you for that. Like we're 3 rounds into the topic, so get some stuff together. Maybe you have to read some generics. I get it, but you do have a couple of things here that are more responsive, and giving them a little bit more time to breathe and putting more stuff on case, a little bit more of a focused strategy probably would have been more effective, at least for me. Right, spending more time on case to deal with some of the tools that the 1AR is able to leverage against the counterplan and topicality, those cards at the bottom, some of the framing stuff that's in the case that is leveraged against the counterplan. I think that would have been more effective. I know you want to waste some time for the affirmative, and I get that to a certain degree, but I think this is probably overkill and ends up being counterproductive because you're not getting to enough on case or doing enough with things you do on case. So that would be my advice there. Yeah, I think this T argument to me is plausible, but your evidence for it is very bad. So I think you need to tighten that up as well. Like, I think the argument isn't that rights need to be universal, but like, give me a definition of the right to housing, and explain why that is distinct from treaty rights that just implicate housing in some way, shape, or form. Maybe those housing rights are distinct from our understanding of the right to housing, as understood in international law or legislation or whatever, right? So I could see a plausible argument there, but I think the evidence needs to be much better.
I largely agree with a lot of that. I think the one NC is a show. We're gonna use that word. I think if you all have heard that phrase before, you know exactly what word come before show. However, I did not use that phrase. I would like it to be on record that phrase was not used by me because I like to be employed. But I do think that there is, as much as I agree with Chris, I think there are moments that could have been utilized differently in the debate by both of you. Like, you have all of these amazing cards in the 1AC about indigeneity, what it means, how we should talk to people, how we should not talk to people, how they've been historically failed, all of that. And they're like, the farm bill though, dog. I'm saying though. I mean, yeah, they was victim of genocide, but yo, Ukraine, bruh, Ukraine? And you like, I mean, so what's the condition of, okay, great, sure. It's like, I don't think that, given the kinds of things that you're saying in the 1AC, some of the 1AC positions just sound wild. Like wild. Like wild. Like you like, there are like 500 plus nations that have been lied to and victimized by the nation state. And here's how we could do some things to ameliorate that, dog. And they got like, there's foolishness going on. Like you put that in the context. The state should fix it. We should deal with emissions. We should worry about Ukraine. I mean, that genocide was one thing, but Ukraine, Putin, then they tell you you shouldn't have said this at all because new apps are bad and makes things, it's like, come on, though. Come on, man. Like, we need some more of, like, how does that is literally everything that the 1AC talks about. Is that people do anything they can not to talk about the things that are important.
Yeah.
Straight up. So, there's that. And I would say more, but I think that might get into like what my decision was. But I think that, and I also think that there are moments, like I like the crystallization of the 2NR, but I think there are moments that you need to be discussing. Like there is no moment in cross-examination at all of the 1AC where you discuss any of this notion of what seating means, like in terms of seating to Indigenous scholars means. Like you do some of that discourse in the 2NR, granted, but I think if you have a conversation like, okay, what would that actually look like? Does it mean just voting AF? Or what does that seating process look like?
Yeah, I think cross-sex also, going back to it, should have been more focused on the first thing I said with the app. Is like, what does it actually materially do, right? So housing is bad for Indigenous folks, treaty obligations not being lived up to. What changes? Like what is funded? What is built or not built? Those kinds of questions. Against an app that it's new, it's not disclosed, you haven't prepped something for it. Those kind of questions can reveal strategies, right? So instead of just saying like, which of these generics am I going to like shoehorn in here? Asking those specifics could maybe show you that, oh, there's a pick that I can read here, right? There's a process counterpoint that might make sense that otherwise wouldn't reveal itself, right? And I think really digging down, especially against a new app, like what is actually going on here, and like really making them explain in a granular way can open up strategies that might not seem apparent to begin with. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And those questions were not asked, so like I get that like there was a lack of specificity and 100% on you, but like knowing what you say to those questions, I think would be important going forward.
I have a couple of questions. You said that I should have spent more time on case. I agree. Should that have been like, is that a 2NR and 1MC issue, or like,
Yeah, I think it's an NC issue. I think like you're reading stuff that you're not going to go for to waste time, and it does to a certain degree, but the app's able to move pretty efficiently through a lot of those flows. But when you have if you have an off position that you just 100% know you're not going to go for, which I think a few of them fall into that category, and can have like fatal flaws that can be very efficiently dealt with, which I think a few of these do as well, and I think you recognize those flaws. That isn't as much of a time suck as you think it is, and digging down on case and forcing them to not just be able to like extend the aft really quickly and an overview at the top, but like dig down and actually defend, right? Have to deal with turns and have to deal with solvency arguments on case. That is more of a time suck, right? Than an off case that can be dismissed with a quick no link. This evidence doesn't say what you say it says, right?
And then, do you think splitting the 2 and R was correct, or?
I think it was fine. You didn't need to, like, there wasn't a ton to say either of those flows, right? They just hinged on a few small issues and how I resolved them. It's not like spending more time, I think, really would have changed it. Do you have any questions?
I'm thinking.
Okay.
I know that this gets like into a little bit of this is like decision-ish, but is there any feedback you can give me on the T flow?
That's a little sticky.
Yeah.
I don't like not to be like yes, but I don't know how much of that we can talk about.
Yeah.
Not because we don't want to, but just
Yeah,
like that. That's one of the core issues of the debate, and we don't want to get into that.
Yeah, I would say for both of you, this is just speaking for me. So the advice I gave you was like you have these 2 cards that aren't really dealt with. The cross application is a little messy, right? And there's a little bit of comparison done, but not a lot. I think having like some offense on that flow would be important, not just the inter discussion. The flip side of that is for me, right? This is just a paradigmatic issue. You need to be winning like a pretty flawed, like you need to be winning. So what I say in my paradigm is your interp needs to be eligible for me to evaluate offense. You can't win an ineligible interpretation by saying it's good, right? And where that tipping point is a little bit subjective, but it means you need to be doing work on the interp debate and doing evidence comparison, at least to a certain degree. And I think you're a little underinvested there, mainly because I think you miss those cards right now. Whether that's decisive or not, remember there's like no standards on the other side, and like there's evidence both ways. I'm not really going to get into that, but I think you should have given more time to the interp discussion. You should have had some offense on that flow.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, I don't have any more questions. Thank you.
Good debate. Thank you guys for coming.
Good luck.
Thanks all.
What's the social? Is it just called the surrender pin?
Yeah. Surrender.
Oh, one other piece of advice. There should be some conversation here about the pedagogical benefit of having this conversation. There should be, like, I think talked about in the 1AR at some point, given the content of the 1AC.
It's like tape.
Is that like on the T-page proper, Randall, or do you think that's like?
I'm sorry?
Or do you think that discussion or the?
It ought to be in the 1AC.
Okay.
Like, you ought to be saying, like, there's a pedagogical benefit to forcing this kind of conversation. And I think y'all need to be in on that uncomfortability debate early. Like, we get it. Everything we've said here is hard, difficult, complicated, whatever, and that's good considering the history of indigenous genocide.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Probably not. Dude, I have terrible luck with these. I always get the 5 rounds.